London, 1847. The season had returned with its usual cruelty, a glittering carousel of diamonds, deceit, and debutantes. Beneath the pale gaslight, Mayfair gleamed like a jewel, though every facet cut someone. The great Devonshire House was alive with music that night. Violins trembled, laughter rippled, and scandal, that most English perfume, drifted freely through the air. The city's privileged danced as though the world beyond its gilt mirrors did not exist. But among them moved one young woman who did not quite belong, and one young man who wished desperately to forget that he ever had. Miss Clara Whitby arrived late, her carriage wheels splashing through the last of the evening's drizzle. The daughter of a factory magnate, a man whose fortune was measured not in acres but in iron and soot, she carried herself with an elegance that unsettled those who expected vulgarity. Her gown, though modest in cut, shimmered faintly under the chandeliers, its pale blue silk the precise shade of an English morning before the fog burns away. Yet despite her composure, her eyes betrayed nerves. A flicker of uncertainty as footmen opened the great doors, revealing the crush of London's most merciless audience. "Steady, Clara," her father whispered, offering his arm. "Remember, they need us more than they admit." He was wrong, of course. Society never needed anyone who built its railways or its mills. It only tolerated them long enough to profit. Inside, the ballroom was a theater of supremacy. Crystal chandeliers blazed above gowns as heavy as armor, and conversation moved like chess, each word chosen to corner or defend. Titles mattered more than truth, and wealth, though essential, was only respectable when old. A hush fell as the Whitbys entered, followed by a symphony of false smiles. Clara curtsied gracefully to her hostess, the Duchess of Devonshire, who received her with a weary politeness reserved for social experiments. Then, across the marble floor, the crowd parted, and Lord Alaric Ashcombe came into view. He was the kind of man who drew notice not by flourish, but by restraint. Tall, immaculately dressed, and coldly composed, Alaric carried the air of one born to command, yet too weary to care. He was the second son of the Earl of Wexley, a family of ancient dignity now crumbling quietly under debt and pride. Among the ton, he was known by a curious nickname, Ducky, a jest from school days that had lingered cruelly into adulthood. The name suggested softness, but those who knew him understood it was irony. There was nothing tender about Lord Ashcombe. When he first saw Clara, she was speaking to the Viscountess Morton, her laugh low, her poise too effortless for a newcomer. Alaric's gaze lingered longer than courtesy allowed. Something in her face, the clear, searching intelligence, unsettled him. She looked not like a girl seeking approval, but like a woman quietly judging the world that presumed to measure her. Still, he reminded himself of his duty to the order of things. New wealth should never mistake proximity for acceptance. Their introduction came swiftly. Lady Morton, eager for sport, drew them together under the pretense of civility. "Lord Ashcombe, may I present Miss Whitby, whose family's iron runs through half our railways." The tone suggested contamination, disguised as accomplishment. Alaric bowed. "Then I owe Miss Whitby my thanks, for it seems we all ride upon her father's endeavors." Clara met his gaze steadily. "You are kind, my lord, though I suspect gratitude sits uneasily on a gentleman's tongue when spoken to industry." The faintest smile touched his lips, admiration or mockery. It was impossible to tell. "Perhaps," he said, "but we must all adapt to progress, even when it offends our sense of tradition." She tilted her head. And yet, tradition rarely asks permission to offend in return. Their words glittered, but beneath them something raw flickered. Curiosity, perhaps even attraction. Still, it ended with the chill of expectation. As the music swelled for the next quadrille, Alaric's expression hardened. "Forgive me," he said softly, his tone precise as glass, "but I find sincerity a luxury seldom afforded to those who purchase entry." He inclined his head, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not fit to be my wife, Miss Whitby." The words were quiet, but the silence that followed roared. A nearby matron gasped. Another feigned ignorance. Clara's breath caught, though she did not flinch. Instead, she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that forgives nothing yet dignifies everything. "Then it is well, my lord," she replied evenly, "that I never applied for the position." He turned away, but his composure cracked for a heartbeat, a flicker of shame or something close to it. The dance resumed, but the gossip had already begun its poisonous bloom. An hour later, when the final waltz began, the scene took its cruel twist. Clara, left partnerless by unspoken decree, stood near the edge of the ballroom, her gloved hands folded, her face serene despite the humiliation circling her like perfume. Alaric, across the room, felt the eyes of his peers upon him, mocking, expectant. Something in him rebelled. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps pride in revolt. Whatever its nature, it propelled him forward. He crossed the marble floor. Conversations faltered. The orchestra hesitated on a note. Before the gathered multitude, he stopped before Clara Whitby and bowed deeply. Then, without a word, he took her hand and pressed his lips to the silk of her glove. The hall froze. Gaslight shimmered against her pale wrist as his mouth lingered a second too long. To the crowd, it was scandal, a lord offering gallantry to a girl beneath him. To Clara, it was confusion and something else, the strange ache of being seen, even through disdain. When he straightened, their eyes met, his guarded, hers aflame with restrained fury. "Good evening, Miss Whitby," he said quietly. "Good evening, my lord," she replied. He turned, walked away, and with that single gesture, shattered the fragile stillness of the night. The whispers began before the doors closed behind him. The narrator might have called it a kiss of mockery. Yet for those who watched, and for the woman whose name would fill the drawing rooms by morning, it was the beginning of something far more dangerous than insult, curiosity. And curiosity, in London society, was a perilous form of affection. By dawn, the story had already changed hands a dozen times. In the breakfast parlors of Mayfair, amid silver teapots and trembling spoons, tongues wagged with wicked delight. "Did you hear? Lord Ashcombe kissed her hand, publicly. The factory girl." Each retelling grew more theatrical, until the gesture became either an act of defiance or one of humiliation. But for Miss Clara Whitby, it was neither. It was simply bewildering, a moment carved out of cruelty, then gilded by rumor. She spent the following days in polite exile, declining invitations that arrived less from sincerity than curiosity. Her father, though outwardly unbothered, was unsettled. "London will tire of gossip soon enough," he assured her, his hands busy with correspondence. Yet his voice betrayed unease. Men like him knew the fragility of acceptance. It could vanish faster than steam on iron. Clara only nodded, her expression unreadable, her thoughts returning again and again to that inexplicable kiss. In truth, she could not decide whether she despised Lord Ashcombe or pitied him. His insult had been deliberate, yet his gesture afterward, impulsive, almost penitent, had disrupted her anger. Each time she imagined his voice, she heard not disdain, but something like weariness, as if he too were trapped by the performance of gentility. Still, pride demanded distance. If society wished to laugh, she would give them nothing further to feed upon. Meanwhile, in the hushed sanctuaries of St. James's clubs, Alaric Ashcombe endured his own trial. Men of rank, fat with inherited ease, teased him with venomous amusement. "Our Ducky growing sentimental? Shall we expect an engagement announced in the Times?" One sneered over port. Alaric smiled tightly, replying, "You mistake boredom for romance, Pennington. I was merely saving the lady from solitude." But when laughter erupted, a single phrase cut through it. "Careful, Ashcombe. The new money tend to stain." That night, Alaric rode home through fog-cloaked streets, the sound of hooves echoing his unrest. His life had become a script performed for others. The careful charm, the studied aloofness, the hollow preservation of dignity. Yet the image of Clara's face, serene amid ridicule, intruded like a melody he could not silence. He had meant the kiss, as irony, a gesture to reclaim control. Instead, it had exposed his own confusion. 3 mornings later, a parcel arrived at Clara's townhouse. The footman, pale with curiosity, presented it upon a silver tray. Inside lay a small silver locket, delicate but plainly crafted, enclosing a pressed violet and a folded slip of parchment. No signature, only a single line written in a precise, masculine hand. For the one who endured grace under cruelty. Clara read the words once, twice, her heart constricting. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Her first instinct was to send it back. Yet something in its simplicity restrained her. It was not an apology, nor an invitation, merely acknowledgement. She placed the locket away, neither wearing it nor discarding it, as if it were a secret she had not agreed to keep. A week later, their paths crossed again by accident or fate. It was a Sunday in Hyde Park, where London's elite paraded their civility in horse-drawn display. The day was crisp, the air scented faintly of lilacs. Clara, riding beside her father's phaeton, caught sight of a familiar figure dismounting near the Serpentine. Lord Ashcombe, his coat impeccably cut, his face unreadable. He approached with measured courtesy, removing his hat. "Miss Whitby," he greeted, bowing slightly. "My lord." Her tone was formal, steady. "I fear I owe you more than silence can repay," he began. "My words that evening were unworthy of the setting and of you." She met his eyes. "Then perhaps silence is the better repayment, my lord. It costs less hypocrisy." He paused, surprised by the precision of her reply. "You are right," he admitted softly. "Still, allow me this. I spoke from arrogance, not conviction. I mistook birth for merit, as men of my kind are trained to do." "And have you since retrained yourself?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Not entirely, but I find my lessons are better learned when the tutor does not flatter me." Her gaze softened despite herself. Yet before she could respond, her father called her away. She inclined her head politely and drove off, leaving Alaric standing alone among the carriages and whispers. That evening, he wrote again and then burned the letter. Words failed him, propriety forbade him. But his restlessness grew. He found himself asking about her at gatherings, studying each rumor with quiet irritation. To some she remained a curiosity, to others an opportunity. To him, she had become a question he could not dismiss. A fortnight later, their next meeting was unavoidable. The Whitbys were invited to a private viewing at the Ashcombe estate, where a collection of family portraits was to be exhibited before auction. Clara's father insisted they attend. "Business demands presence," he said, "and presence demands composure." She agreed, though her pulse betrayed her calm. The Ashcombe gallery was vast and cold, its walls lined with faces painted to remember what the family had forgotten. Nobility as an illusion of permanence. Clara paused before a portrait of a woman, serene, melancholy, with Alaric's eyes. "My mother," came his voice behind her. She turned, startled. He stood in the doorway, unguarded for once. "She looks kind," Clara said quietly. "She was," he replied. "Too kind, perhaps. The world doesn't reward it. Nor does it forget it," she said. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, not yet forgiveness. He hesitated, then added, "I sent you something. A locket. I know. Did you destroy it?" "No," her voice was steady. "But I did not wear it either." "Then it is safe," he murmured, almost to himself. Before either could say more, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the fragile stillness. They stepped apart, their poise instantly restored, as other guests entered the room. But the air between them remained charged, alive with unsaid words. When Clara left the estate that evening, she discovered her handkerchief missing. Somewhere she had dropped it, ivory linen, embroidered with her initials. Alaric found it later, folded neatly beside the portrait of his mother. He lifted it carefully, as if it were something fragile and forbidden. Then he slipped it into his coat pocket, aware, perhaps for the first time, that a simple piece of cloth could carry the weight of a confession neither of them yet dared to speak aloud. Summer arrived as if painted upon the English countryside. Sunlight soft through the haze, hedgerows in bloom, the air carrying the scent of grass after rain. Yet within the Ashcombe estate, warmth remained a guest seldom welcomed. Duty, debt, and decorum lingered in every corridor like inherited ghosts. It was there, under the guise of hospitality, that Lord Ashcombe invited the Whitbys to stay. Officially, it was a gesture of reconciliation between old nobility and new wealth. In truth, it was Alaric's unspoken attempt to understand the woman who had unsettled his certainty. Clara hesitated before accepting. "He mocked me before the entire ton," she reminded her father. "If this is meant as reparation, I doubt sincerity is part of it." But her father's ambitions were practical. "You are mistaken, Clara. This is an opportunity. Society's gates open only for those who step forward." And so, against her better judgment, she agreed. Their arrival was met with decorum and thin smiles. Lady Ashcombe, pale and severe, greeted them in the grand hall, her pearls gleaming like frost. "We are always pleased to welcome friends of my son," she said, a phrase so polished it revealed its own falseness. Alaric stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. When Clara curtsied, he bowed with the practiced ease of one who hides discomfort beneath ritual. For the first 2 days, civility reigned. Dinners passed with measured conversation. Politics, poetry, the weather, topics chosen to exclude emotion. Clara endured it all with poise, though the atmosphere pressed against her like starched fabric. Alaric watched her silently, noting how she navigated each subtle insult with grace sharper than defiance. He began to realize that while he had once pitted her for entering a world not built for her, it was that he, his peers, his mother, who looked small within it. On the third evening, the rain began. It fell without restraint, drumming upon the great windows until the garden vanished behind a curtain of silver. Guests retired early, retreating to parlors and chambers scented with damp wood and candle smoke. Clara, restless, wandered the halls alone, drawn by the faint glow of a lamp from the library. She entered softly, the room vast and warm, its air alive with the perfume of old books and rain. Alaric was there, seated by the fire, a volume open upon his knee. He looked up, startled but not displeased. "Miss Whitby," he said, rising, "it seems this storm has robbed us both of sleep." She hesitated at the threshold. "Forgive the intrusion. I had not realized the room was occupied." "Then allow me to make it less so," he replied, gesturing toward the fire. "Please, the house feels less forbidding with company." Reluctantly, she stepped forward. The silence between them was tentative, like a truce unspoken. After a moment, he closed his book. "I have wanted to speak plainly with you," he began. "Without audience, without expectation. Plain speech is rare among your circle, my lord. It tends to startle those unaccustomed to hearing it." He smiled faintly. "Then I hope not to startle you, only to explain. I wronged you that night at Devonshire House. My words were not born of truth, but of cowardice. I mistook cruelty for control." Clara regarded him steadily. "And now you seek forgiveness?" "No. Understanding, perhaps. Forgiveness must be earned, and I have not yet done the work to deserve it." The firelight softened his face, revealing weariness where arrogance had once lived. "You see," he continued, "my family taught me that worth is inherited, not achieved. Yet everything about your world defies that. You build what you desire. You claim no permission. I envied that freedom, though I called it vulgarity." Her gaze drifted to the rain-blurred windows. "Freedom has its price, my lord. My father's hands bear it still. But you are wrong if you think our worlds cannot meet. The trouble is not the difference. It is pride." He looked at her with quiet intensity. "Then perhaps pride is the one inheritance I wish to renounce." A distant peal of thunder shuddered through the room. Clara turned toward him. "Why tell me this? Confession rarely changes anything among people who value appearances above truth." "Because I would rather speak honestly to you once," he said, "than politely to the world forever." Her breath caught. The words were not rehearsed, and that alone made them dangerous. The firelight flickered between them like breath itself. Slowly, she extended a hand toward the mantel, tracing the carved initials AA with her fingertips. "You live surrounded by your past," she murmured. "Does it never tire you?" "Constantly," he said, "but it is all I have left to guard." "Then perhaps you guard the wrong thing." Their eyes met. The sound of rain deepened, steady and hypnotic. He stepped closer, not enough to breach decorum, but near enough that she could sense the change in the air. His voice was low, uncertain. "I once told you that you were not fit to be my wife," he said. "Now I wonder if I am fit to deserve you." The silence that followed was thick, trembling. Her expression softened, not with surrender, but with recognition of a truth neither could yet name. "Careful, my lord," she whispered. "Society might forgive an insult, but it never forgives a reversal." He gave a short, rueful laugh. "Then let them gossip. They've done little else for me." For a moment, it seemed the storm outside and the storm within them would meet. Alaric reached out, not to claim her hand, but to rest his upon the edge of the mantel beside hers. The space between their fingers pulsed with unspoken longing. Then came the interruption. A knock at the door, sharp and insistent. A servant entered, eyes lowered. "My lord, Lady Ashcombe requests your presence." "At once." Alaric straightened. "Now?" "Yes, my lord. She says it concerns your future." Clara stepped back, the spell broken. "Your mother is not one to wait," she said quietly. He turned toward her, hesitation in his eyes. "Will you be here tomorrow, if I'm not sent away first?" He inclined his head, a gesture both promise and apology. Then he was gone, leaving only the sound of rain and the faint warmth of the place where his hand had hovered beside hers. Clara stood for a long while before the dying fire, her pulse unsteady, her thoughts warring between reason and desire. Outside, the storm receded, but within the house, another was just beginning, one that would test the fragile line between dignity and love. Winter fell upon London like a sentence pronounced, cold, precise, and inescapable. Snow softened the soot-stained rooftops of Mayfair, yet beneath the whiteness the city's heart beat on, restless as ever. In parlors and drawing rooms, tongues still wagged about Lord Ashcombe and Miss Whitby, though the scandal had aged into speculation. Some swore she had refused him. Others whispered that his family had sent her away. But no one truly knew, for neither spoke publicly again that summer after Surrey. The truth was quieter and far more fragile. Lady Ashcombe had confronted her son that night in the library, her composure a weapon honed by decades of breeding. "You will not throw away centuries of name for a woman born to machinery," she declared. Alaric had not argued, not because he agreed, but because he understood the futility of reasoning with a lineage. And Clara, sensing the storm before it struck, had withdrawn from the estate the following morning, leaving behind no farewell, no note, only silence. Now, months later, Alaric returned to the rhythm of London society, but its music no longer moved him. The clubs, the balls, the laughter, all had the stale air of a play performed too many times. He had inherited not joy, but expectation, a marriage to be arranged, a title to be protected, a legacy to uphold. Yet beneath the veneer of obedience, a quiet defiance took root. Clara, meanwhile, had retreated into work beside her father. The Whitby factories expanded northward, their iron rails binding the nation's progress. Her father was proud, but Clara's thoughts were elsewhere, haunted by the sound of rain upon glass and the look in a man's eyes when apology turned to longing. She wore the silver locket now, though hidden beneath her gowns, its violet faded but unforgotten. To the world, she remained composed, respectable, untouched by folly. But when she heard his name whispered, her heartbeat betrayed her restraint. Then, one bleak December evening, an envelope arrived sealed with the Ashcombe crest. Her hands trembled as she broke it open. Inside was a formal invitation, a charity gala hosted by the Duchess of Bedford to raise funds for London's impoverished children. Beneath the printed words, written in a familiar hand, A single line, "I shall be there." One final apology, spoken before all. Her father urged her not to attend. "The Ashcombes have made their position clear, Clara. Do not offer them another chance to wound you." "And yet," she replied softly, "I must hear what form his apology takes." The night of the gala unfolded beneath chandeliers brighter than reason. The Duchess's ballroom shimmered with frost-tipped garlands and candlelight, a vision of charity gilded by vanity. Clara entered unnoticed at first, her gown a deep winter blue, her expression serene. But whispers followed her as she crossed the room, the return of a ghost to the scene of her undoing. Then, near the dais where benefactors gathered, she saw him. Alaric stood among peers and parliament men, his black coat immaculate, his face pale but resolute. When their eyes met across the hall, conversation faltered for the briefest instant. He inclined his head slightly, a signal both question and plea. She gave no response. The evening proceeded with speeches, hollow praises of virtue. Then Lord Ashcombe was announced. As he stepped forward, the crowd stilled, expecting another polished address. But his voice, when it came, carried no artifice. "My friends," he began, "we gather tonight in the spirit of compassion. Yet how easily we forget that charity begins not with coin, but with conscience." A murmur ran through the audience. He continued, eyes never leaving Clara's. "Months ago, I spoke words born of arrogance. I measured worth by birth and mocked what I did not understand. The lady I wronged showed more grace in silence than I in all my supposed breeding. It is she who taught me what nobility truly means." Gasps rippled. The Duchess herself stiffened. But Alaric pressed on. "To Miss Clara Whitby, whose name I once treated carelessly, I owe not apology alone, but respect. It is time the old order learned humility from the new." The applause was hesitant, polite, uncertain, a trembling between admiration and scandal. Alaric stepped down, the air around him taut as a drawn bow. He moved through the crowd toward her, ignoring the stares, the whispered warnings. When he reached her, silence fell like snow. "Miss Whitby," he said quietly, bowing low, "once I kissed your hand to mock the world. Tonight, I would do so to honor it." Every gaze in the room fixed upon them. Clara's breath trembled in her throat. She could have refused, propriety demanded it. Yet something deeper stirred, a fierce clarity that outshone caution. Slowly, she extended her hand. Alaric took it gently, his lips brushing the silk of her glove with reverence, not possession. The orchestra faltered, the moment stretched, fragile, luminous. It was not passion unveiled, but redemption earned in the smallest gesture, a public undoing of private cruelty. When he rose, he met her gaze and found not forgiveness, but understanding, the kind that binds two proud souls who have glimpsed each other's flaws and found them human. The room erupted in whispers. Some called it scandalous, others brave. But Clara heard nothing beyond the steady rhythm of her own heart. Later, as snow thickened over London streets, she stood by the carriage waiting to depart. Alaric approached once more, his breath visible in the cold. "You will not thank me, I suspect," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "Gratitude is not what I feel." He smiled faintly. "Then what is it?" "Certainty," she said, "that some debts can only be repaid in truth." He bowed his head. "And truth, Miss Whitby, is all I have left to offer." "Then keep it," she murmured. "It suits you better than pride." Their eyes met for a final, lingering moment. Neither reached for the other, though everything within them ached too. The air between them felt alive, unfinished, unspoken, enduring. As the carriage door closed, Alaric stood alone beneath the falling snow. The narrator might have called it an ending, but history prefers ambiguity. London would forget their names soon enough, yet somewhere, preserved in rumor and recollection, remained the memory of a single kiss. Not the first, but the last, and perhaps the truest. And for those who listened closely, even through the hush of time, that kiss still echoed, the sound of pride breaking and love, at last, taking its place.